Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the sixth and final season of The Sopranos. A season that, to me personally, is not as brilliant and not as amazing as some people make it out to be. I just have to be honest here. I didn't really like this season that much. There were some episodes that I did really enjoy and I thought were great. And I felt that there were some subplots that were effective. I also feel that there were some cameos that really worked for me. And I do feel that there is a fair amount of good in this season. But if somebody put a gun to my head and basically forced me to say what the worst season of the show is after watching the entire season, I'm going to say it's this season. And I know that's not a popular opinion, but I will explain why as I go on in this video. But before I go any further, I got to give a shout out yet again to Shine for requesting this review, as well as a review of the entire series. And I also want to thank Shine for his patience when it comes to my reviews of this show. I know that I've taken a while to finish this, but I hope that it was worth the wait, and I hope you enjoy this video, this finale. Uh, and if there is another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal, my Patreon, or my Cash App. The links to all three are in the video description down below, and I will try to get to your requests as soon as I possibly can. Now, the sixth season of The Sopranos is interesting because it's a two-parter. So it's the longest season of the show because now instead of there being like 12 or 13 episodes, there is 21. And I think that is definitely part of this season's problem. That's why there are so many more filler episodes in this season to me than other seasons. And that's why this season is just so meandering and just feels like there's just a lot of stuff that's just being thrown at the wall because it's the last season of the show. And that's also why there's a lot of forced writing and forced character arcs and things that just aren't really as satisfying to me as they could have been. And I know I'm in the minority. I know that. This season has become a lot of Sopranos fans like favorite season, their pick for the best season of the show. It's underrated, it's brilliant, it's misunderstood, so on and so forth. But I agree to disagree. I really do when it comes to this season. I don't think it needed to be as long as it ultimately was. I think there's a lot of subplots that really didn't add that much. And I think they easily could have been cut out and you wouldn't miss that much at all. And I think if you focus more on the war between the New York mob and New Jersey, I think that definitely would have improved this season because it felt like that was kind of an afterthought at points, even though that is clearly the main conflict of this entire season and what season 5 was building up to. And there's a lot of questionable writing in this season to me. And I'm just going to leave it at that cuz I'm going to go more in depth and more in detail on why I feel this season has so much questionable writing. As I go on throughout this review of season um, 6. Now, what's also kind of intriguing is that this wasn't really the plan. The plan was not to have the sixth season be the final season of the show. The initial plan was to stretch things out to 8 seasons. Pretty much everybody involved with the show had agreed upon this, but James Gandolfini didn't want to do that. And since he's the star of the show, they had to change course. And that's what led to this big two-part season that acted as the conclusion to the entire series. And that's also why you have David Chase and just another writers just throwing everything that they had in mind, every last thing that they wanted to cover or to briefly discuss or mention throughout this series. They just chucked it all into this last season. And to me, it's very obvious that that's the case. Now, as with all of the other previous seasons, you have the main cast who's back and all deliver incredible performances for the most part, especially from James Gandolfini as Tony Soprano and uh, Edie Falco as Carmela and uh, Lorraine Bracco as Jennifer Melfi, Dominic Chianci as Junior, Michael Imperioli as Christopher Moltisanti, Stephen Van Zant as Silvio and Tony Sirico as Paulie. I feel Robert Eiler's performance, though, is not the best. He's given more screen time in this season, especially in the second half of season 6, and his limitations as an actor are really exposed here. Uh, I would say at best he's just kind of there, but at worst he's really not very good. And I just have to be honest here. He hasn't really evolved that much in terms of his acting from when he was just a kid. He's playing a young adult in this season, and he hasn't really evolved that much as an actor. It's just the same level of performance, and that's definitely something that I would say is a little disappointing considering that AJ is such a key part of this season. Jamie-Lynn Sigler is still decent in her few scenes that she has in this as Meadow. Same thing goes for Ada Turturro as Janice. Stephen R. Shrippa is solid as Bobby. So is Joseph R. Ganiscoli as Vito. Well, I wouldn't say he's solid. He's also kind of weak. The actor I meant to mention when it comes to a solid performance is Dan Grimaldi as Patsy, and also Vincent Curatola as Johnny Sack, especially when he's sick and he's dying of cancer. I felt that was actually some legitimately great acting on his part. But Joseph R. Ganiscoli, he's not the best actor either. He's pretty, I wouldn't say bad, but definitely below average. And that's a problem too, because he has a pretty significant subplot in season 6. Frank Vincent is just as much of a bastard as always as Phil. Like, the guy does a great job playing a type of character that you legitimately hate. He's a hothead and a total asshole. And the rest of the cast is fine too, Rhea Abruzzo is little Carmine. Um, John Ventimiglia as Artie, and some of the reoccurring cast members too, like Matt Servito as Dwight, Cara Buono as Kelly Moltisanti, Dania Ramirez as Blanca, uh, Chris Caldovino as Billy Leotardo, and some other additions to the cast, and returning cast members like Tim Daly is back as the writer friend of Christopher Moltisanti. You have Juliana Margulies from ER. She's in this as a character who is working on trying to sell. Well, she's trying to buy some property from Tony for Jamba Juice, and then Tony and her have a bit of a fling. And then there's this other actress named Sarah Shahaney, I think, and she plays this other woman that Tony meets when he's in Vegas, and they do peyote. And both actresses, in my opinion, did some really great work when it comes to their small parts in season 6. But it's definitely still James Gandolfini and Falco and the rest of the main cast. It's their show, and they definitely don't go out with a whimper when it comes to their performances, other than actors that were already kind of iffy to begin with, like Robert Eiler. Now, let's get to the rundown, shall we? Part 1 of season 6 has about 12 episodes. The first episode is called Members Only, the season premiere. It's directed by Tim Van Patten and written by Terrence Winter. And the premiere episode deals with Eugene, who he is a made man. He's trying to get permission from Tony or the FBI to retire to Florida with his family, but Tony's not willing to allow him to retire. The FBI is not willing to budge either. His relationship with his family is starting to splinter as a result. And because he can't handle it, he winds up just killing himself. He hangs himself in his garage. That's a pretty big dramatic subplot throughout this entire episode. Carmilla's spec house is having some issues because of some corners that are being cut by Hugh. Hesh's son-in-law gets beat up by Lupertazzi men. That is really, in my opinion, an example of some pretty questionable writing, because it's so lazy. It's lazy and uninspired. It's just copying a subplot and drama that we already saw in a previous episode, in previous seasons. There was that one guy who was related to one of Tony's crew who wound up getting beat up with a golf club randomly by this dude. And then Tony decided to hire Burt Young to go take the guy out. We already dealt with that. About a guy who's connected with somebody in the crew who got beat up and was sent to the hospital. Like, we're just recycling plot points at this point. That is not a good sign at all. And it's not the first time that dramatic elements and dramatic subplots are recycled in this season. It's such a brilliant, amazing season, but it's recycling plot points. It's recycling entire subplots. So Tony, he's unable to get in contact with Phil because Phil is, being Phil. And so Tony has to talk to Johnny Sack from prison to get a meeting where Phil reluctantly agrees to pay the man who was brutalized. Junior, at this point, is continuing to deteriorate when it comes to his mental state. Melfi recommends him to be put in a nursing home, but Tony, because of how things ended with Livia, he refuses to do so. Janice doesn't want to take care of Junior either, doesn't want to deal with that responsibility because, it's Janice. And Tony winds up going to his house later, to Junior's house later. I think he was going to try to tell Junior that, okay, I'm going to help you, or I'm going to do what I can to help you out. But Junior winds up snapping and shoots Tony in the stomach because Junior is starting to lose his grip on reality. He's forgetting what time period he's in. He's forgetting where he is, who he's talking to, or pretty much a lot of things at this point. He's really starting to fall off, and he's becoming a danger to himself as well as other people, and he just assumes Tony is somebody who's there to try to whack him, and so he winds up shooting Tony in the stomach. And then Tony winds up calling 911, and that sets up a large chunk of the first part of season 6. This long, drawn out uh, saga with Tony in a coma in the hospital after suffering a gunshot wound to the stomach, which is another instance of recycling drama. We already went through this with Christopher. When Christopher was shot and he was dying in the hospital, we already went through all of that. It's not really that much different because it's Tony. It's the same sort of thing. Somebody who is an important part of the cast and is an important character of the show is wounded mortally and is in the hospital for multiple episodes and has hallucinations and dreams. And people are visiting the hospital and are worried and are emotional and are sad. It's the same thing. It literally is exactly the same thing. You just swap a Tony for Christopher. And the Christopher thing, the Christopher take on it, I felt was a lot more compelling because it wasn't as pretentious as this. Like there was some stuff where okay, you could see maybe a little bit of pretension, but here it is so unbelievably pretentious with the whole Kevin Finnerty thing. Because that's what's introduced in the second episode. Join the Club. Join the Club is directed by David Nutter, written by David Chase. And this is where Tony wakes up in what looks to be a hotel room in California. He sees some light flashing in the distance, like a lighthouse or something. He finds out that he has the suitcase of some guy named Kevin Finnerty who looks like him. He starts looking for his suitcase, his items, to no avail. He has a dinner with some group at the hotel, and they start throwing in some ideas that he might be having a midlife crisis. A woman from the group refuses to have sex with him because he's married. There's a spotlight that's hovering over them, which it could be interpreted as the light that the doctors are flashing in his eyes periodically. Because you find out that Tony's in an induced coma after being shot in the stomach. He ripped out his breathing tube, and so he has to be put back under. AJ is doing typical AJ stuff and just not wanting to uh, visit Tony in the hospital because he's emotional and doesn't want to see him that way. But eventually he gets the courage to see him, and then he decides, I'm gonna kill Junior to get revenge for what he did to you. He continues to be foolish and impulsive when some reporters are talking to him, and then he winds up falling for the reporters' shtick, where the reporter is, trying to get some words out of him, and he falls for it because honestly, he's pretty dumb. And so he winds up giving them some sound bites. Tony gets attacked by a bunch of, I think they look like monks who believe that he is Finnerty because the real Kevin Finnerty did something that caused their church to suffer some financial loss or something. And Tony falls down a flight of stairs. He gets an MRI that shows that he has the early stages of Alzheimer's, which is a connection to what's going on with Junior. Tony returns to his hotel room, picks up the phone, puts it back down, stares back at the flashing light again. These are episodes that I think the people who really like the philosophical, subtextual, and more deep aspects of the show, the themes and so on and so forth. This is the type of stuff that they eat up. But for me, I found it to be just very pretentious and boring. Like, I don't care about the Kevin Finnerty thing, and it goes on for way too long. It's not just this one episode, it continues on into the third episode. And like I said, the drama is drama that we've already experienced. We've already had Tony in near death scenarios. We've already had his family worried about him, worried about him maybe being severely injured or hurt or dead after a car accident or when he was having the panic attacks and all of this other stuff. We've already been down that road. So this just feels like it's repetitive at this point. Now, episode 3 is called Mayhem. It's directed by Jack Bender and written by Matthew Weiner. And this one has Paulie killing a couple drug dealers, stealing a massive amount of money from them. But Silvio, who is the acting boss right now, he decides to divide it in between the crew in a way that pisses him off. I will give this episode some credit because now it's starting to focus a little more on the crew and what's going on with the power vacuum and with Tony being in the hospital. But even then, there's still a lot of the Kevin Finnerty stuff. And I'm like, stop going back to that coma dream. I don't really care about that. I want to know more about how Paulie and Silvio and the rest of the crew are dealing with Tony being gone. That's far more interesting to me. And so Carmela is having her issues with AJ. She calls him a burden after discovering what he said to the reporter. She is also talking to Melfi and talks about how she doesn't feel guilt over Tony's work. But she feels bad for mothering children with a criminal. So another way that Carmela just comes across as a pretty lame person, to put it lightly. Chris's interest in the movie industry resurfaces, and he forces J.T. Dolan, Tim Daly's character, to write a mob slasher film called Cleaver. They pitch it to Little Carmine. Dolan winds up coming up with the name Cleaver, and that's when the whole Cleaver thing starts. Tony goes into cardiac arrest. He sees a family reunion flyer in Finnerty's briefcase. He goes to the family reunion. He's stopped by a man who looks exactly like Tony Blendetto, and then tells him that he's going home. But in order for him to go home, he has to let go of his business, which is a not so subtle way of showing a near-death scenario. And Meadows' voice calls to Tony, winds up waking him up. Chris tells Tony about Cleaver, and then sees some saying that's taped on the wall that's an extension of the pretentious nature of this episode. Sometimes I go about in pity for myself, and all the while a great wind carries me across the sky. There's a lot of that in this season. A lot of pretentious quotes. AJ is reading some pretentious ass quote from a book later on in the season. You have this. I know a lot of fans of this show and the fans of this season in particular love this stuff. Cool, you can eat it up. It's not my personal taste. Now, episode 4 is called The Fleshy Part of the Thigh. It's directed by Alan Taylor and written by Diane Frolov and Andrew Schneider. Tony, now he is out of the hospital. And he is befriending a couple people. There's a physicist who's played by Hal Holbrook, by the way, and he's phenomenal in this. So it was really cool to see Hal Holbrook in a Sopranos episode. And he alone elevates this episode for me. Like, this is the first episode of the season where I was like, okay, I liked that. The other episodes, I liked parts of them, but this is the first one that I genuinely liked because of Hal Holbrook's character. And the rapper guy, though, was really not needed. It's just set up so Bobby can do a favor for him and shoot him in the ass. Seemed like a really weak and lame way of trying to provide some social commentary about hip hop artists. The writer and David Chase saw some episodes of the Boondocks and was like, "Oh, I could do that too." It really felt like, "Hey, I'm gonna have some of the same social commentary," but it just felt very unnecessary and forced. Just another idea that he threw in there because he wanted to do it, and he didn't have, uh, 2 more seasons to be able to discuss or expand upon his ideas anymore. So just throwing them all into the entire season all in one go. Carmela is doing her thing, you know, still worrying about Tony, but very thankful and grateful that he's out of his coma and talking about it being a miracle, and she's still on AJ for, what he's doing and all of his part in everything. Tony is really starting to show that he is an even bigger asshole than ever before in this episode. And it's a reoccurring theme throughout this season, because that is another instance of David Chase having contempt for his audience. He did not like the fact that there was a lot of people who genuinely started to like Tony Soprano as a character. And so he decided to break him down and present him as a stereotypical sociopath. To present Tony as the most sociopathic, narcissistic piece of shit possible. And to me, it's painfully forced. It feels completely out of place and tonally inconsistent to the way Tony was written and the way Tony was presented throughout the series previously. And the arguments that a lot of fans and a lot of other people have had about Tony always being a sociopath, they all stem from this season and what is established in this season, not what's established in the previous 5 seasons. To me, the bulk of the show is far more important than what David Chase decided to throw in there last minute. That's just me personally. And this whole Force stuff with him being upset about the paramedic stealing from him and all of this other stuff where he's overcompensating after his injury, it just felt so forced and inauthentic. Now, outside, for the first time since the shooting, Tony has this new mindset about how every day is a gift. Paulie finds out that his aunt is actually his mother, and that winds up leading to him breaking things off with his ma, the person that he considered to be his mother for his entire life. He informs Nucci, who's actually his aunt, that he will no longer be providing for her. And he throws a temper tantrum. The man who ran Tony and Johnny's legitimate sanitation business, he winds up dying. The son is now trying to sell the company. Tony settles the price for his share with Phil, allows it to be sold, but Paulie attacks the son, and he demands some more money that'll cover Nucci's retirement bills, because by the end of the episode, he winds up changing his mind about uh, the Nucci, because he feels bad about having this temper tantrum, throwing her TV out the window and making her cry. And he realizes that, yeah, she may not be my real mother, but she was there for me, and I'm going to try to be there for her. So that was honestly sweet and kind of surprising that Polly actually was willing to change as a character. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff in this episode that I like. There are some things that I don't, and a lot of it is just deals with Bobby and that rapper guy. But and Tony and the whole "you stole from me" which was just forced and a bunch of bullshit. But it gets worse as the season goes on in terms of some really forced sociopathic tendencies that Tony supposedly has. Now, episode 5 is called Mr. and Mrs. John Sacramone Request. This one is directed by Steve Buscemi, written by Terrence Winter. And this is all really the majority of this is about Johnny Sack's daughter's wedding. And I didn't mind it, but for me it was kind of a filler episode. It was nice for Johnny Sack. It was a nice showcase for him in terms of his character. But there's a lot of the stuff in this that I didn't really care that much about. I really don't care that much about his daughter and her wedding. I really don't. The character is barely a character throughout the entire series, to be perfectly honest. But Johnny gets granted temporary release from prison to attend his daughter's wedding. That's where he asks Tony to kill Rusty, who may cause another power struggle. Johnny is escorted away from the venue before he see the full ceremony. He breaks down in front of the guests, leading Phil to voice his distaste for the supposed loss of masculinity, which is just another way of this show and the writing staff and David Chase poking fun at the fragile male egos of these mob bosses. And I find that kind of interesting that that's a very running theme in this show. And when it comes to this season and how some people talk about it and how some people defend it, and in particular the ending of this show, it's an extension of these mob guys and their fragile male egos. I find that really interesting and kind of ironic that a show that's criticizing that has a bunch of fans who are an extension of the things that the show was criticizing. But I'll leave that for a completely separate video because I actually am planning on doing a separate video on the ending. Because I got a lot to say and a lot to get off my chest in regards to that. But you have the wedding scene, which well, it's not just scene. It's a series of sequences. The wedding is the majority of this episode. Junior is transferred to a private psychiatric facility. Vito gets spotted by some Lupertazzi men in a gay club, and then he goes into hiding. And that's the start of this major subplot in this first part of season 6. Tony refuses to talk to Melfi about the shooting. He's talking about how his men are giving him certain looks since his return from the hospital. She advises him to act as if he's not feeling vulnerable, so then he picks a fight with his bodyguard and wins, only to go vomit blood in the bathroom, which is the end of that episode. It seems like a good running theme in this is just breaking apart the fragile male ego. That's really what this episode seems to be. And the whole thing with Tony, like, okay, act as if you're not feeling vulnerable. All right. Tony normally didn't seem like a guy who would do something like that. Like, he was a guy who was impulsive. He would, beat up on some people, do some stuff, show his anger. But it just felt a little forced to me that he would just go that far and beat up this random guy and make up some lie about him doing something that pissed him off. But it's just another way to show Tony is an even bigger asshole in this season than in the previous seasons. That's really what it is. Now, the 6th episode is called Live Free or Die. It's directed by Tim Van Patten, written by David Chase, Terrence Winter, Robin Green, and Mitchell Burgess. Now, it's interesting that you have Mitchell Burgess and Robin Green, who are writers here, because that's the last episode of the show that they were involved with. Because they wound up getting essentially forced off the series by David Chase because of creative differences. Now, if you look at what Robin Green and Mitchell Burgess have done since The Sopranos, and you look what David Chase has done since The Sopranos, I think that it was the wrong move to force him off the show. But that's just me. Now, in this episode, Chris is told by a guy in his addiction recovery group about Vito being spotted in the club, and this just leads to a lot of, the crew finding out about Vito, different people reacting to Vito being gay and being very homophobic. Tony admits to Melfi that while he has a religious objection to homosexuality, he feels that Vito is important to him and that he actually feels like he deserves a second chance. Which, that, in my opinion, is pretty progressive. But when you look at what ultimately happens later on in this season, you don't know whether or not that message actually carries any real weight, which is very problematic, to say the least. But it was still nice to see that the writers were willing to provide Tony with a moment like that, whether he was faking it or not, because it provided a nice dynamic, a nice contrast when it comes to different people's opinions of Ito and how not everybody felt the same way. Now, after learning from Finn that Vito was doing fellatio on a man, Tony's crew is disgusted and they demand him to be killed. Meadow, while she's working as an intern for a law firm, she winds up arguing with Finn about the treatment of financial criminals. She winds up storming out when he points out that Vito may be killed for his sexuality. Vito flees the state. He goes to New Hampshire when men are sent to collect him. And he decides to stay in a bed and breakfast. And that's the end of that episode. There were some interesting discussions about homosexuality and how different people in the crew and different people in the mob would react to a gay mobster. But this was still very much a filler episode to me. Then you get to episode 7, which is Luxury Lounge, directed by Danny Linier and written by Matthew Weiner. And this one deals with Artie confronting Tony because Tony ate at a different restaurant. And there's this whole stuff with Artie being jealous of this other restaurant's success, being unwilling to change to get more customers in the door, just being an egotistical jackass. That's basically what Artie is for most of this episode. He's really annoying in this episode, to be honest. American Express stops doing business with him after Benny and a hostess he was having an affair with run a credit card scam. So he fires the hostess, beats up Benny. Tony forces them to make peace, has Benny have dinner at Vesuvio's, but Artie references Benny's affair in front of his wife. So then Benny forces his hand into a vat of boiling sauce. Tony suggests a therapy to Artie, but he gets rejected because Artie has a bug up his ass in this entire episode. Chris organizes a successful hit on Emilio before going to Los Angeles to cast actors for Cleaver. This is where you get Ben Kingsley and his cameo and the luxury lounge stuff and the free items and Chris trying to get Kingsley into giving him access to the lounge. The commentary about celebrity culture. Chris then winds up mugging Lauren Bacall and winds up giving the items to Tony later on. And Tony's, of course, annoyed with Chris for not being in New Jersey to stop Benny. And I just, there were some interesting things in this episode. The Ben Kingsley cameo was fun, but the whole subplot with Artie was just, it was just annoying. Like the guy was just being a jackass. And yeah, I understand that he was getting scammed, but like the guy was just being so impulsive and just going about it the worst possible way, and looked like he was racial profiling too his own staff, like just a total jerk off. And it was just hard to watch. The best part of that episode is the luxury lounge stuff and trying to get Ben Kingsley to do Cleaver, but at the same time, as much as I don't mind the Ben Kingsley stuff and the Lauren Bacall cameo, it wasn't really needed. it didn't add that much to the show in terms of social commentary or even to the plot. So it really did feel like another filler episode. Like you could have combined certain elements of both of these episodes, 6 and 7, into one episode, and you would have been fine. Episode 8 is called Johnny Cakes. This one is directed by Tim Van Patten. My bad. And written by Diane Frolov and Andrew Schneider. I think this is the first time Diane Frolov is involved in this season. And this one deals with AJ going to nightclubs and being a little shit as usual and wasting all of his money going to nightclubs and doing drugs. He takes a knife to Junior's facility. He winds up dropping it when Junior thought that he was Tony. And then he winds up getting arrested. Tony bails him out. AJ insisted he was trying to avenge Tony like in The Godfather. Of course, Tony brings him back down to earth after that. A friend asks AJ to get Tony to help with a financial dispute. He then has a panic attack. Vito finds himself taken in with a local chef. They wind up kissing, but then he punches Jim, which leads to a fight. This whole stuff with Vito and Jim, to me, was completely unnecessary. I don't have a problem with gay love, gay romance. Do your thing. As long as you're not hurting anybody, I don't have any problem with it. But it was just dragged out for so long in this, and it was just a typical romance. The only thing different was that it was between two gay men and who were also married and were in the closet, and it just wasn't really, in my opinion, as compelling as the writers and Chase thought it was. It doesn't help either that the actor who plays Vito is not really that great of an actor. Several days later, Vito apologizes to Jim and they have makeup sex. Tony is, feeling pretty good himself for the first time after the shooting. So then, when he feels himself, he then starts to try to find a guma. He's accosted by a realtor who offers to buy a store and turn it into a Jamba Juice. He rejects the deals until the price reaches the price he wants. And then he's starting to put plans in motion to make her a guma, but then he stops himself from having sex with her and then winds up getting pissed at Carmela when he gets back home later that night. To be perfectly honest, this is another episode that's kind of a filler episode. The stuff with AJ going to Junior facility, trying to kill Junior. Okay, all right. I didn't mind that. That gave AJ a little bit more to do than just be Mopey McGee. But other than that, like the whole Vito stuff, the Jamba Juice thing, like a lot of it just wasn't really that necessary to the plot. Like there's gonna be a war between New Jersey and New York, and we're 8 episodes in, and we haven't really set that up yet. I think that was a mistake. Just focusing on way too much of this secondary subplot stuff, and not enough on what should be the main plot, the main conflict in the entire season. And I wonder if that's intentional. It's another way for David Chase to get back at the audience that he's grown so much contempt for by not giving them what they want. Because it seems like that's a lot of this season. Oh, I'll show you. You want to see that. You want to see certain things. You don't get to see those things. I'm not gonna let you see those things because you don't deserve to see those things. He became visibly annoyed with the popularity of his own show. It's very obvious. There are entire subplots in this season that are only there because he was annoyed with fans and the way that they perceive Tony Soprano or the way that they perceive the show. So I would not be surprised if this is just another extension of that, with these subplots and these arcs and these other things that are brought up in this season. The entire for the on it, not maybe not the entirety of the first part of season 6, but a large chunk of it is just a bunch of side stories and other stuff that doesn't really add that much to the overall saga. Uh Episode 9 is called The Ride. It's directed by Alan Taylor and written by Terrence Winter. And this deals with Christopher marrying this girl that he was dating because he finds out that she's pregnant. While driving back from a business trip, he and Tony steal expensive wine from bikers. I think they call themselves the Vipers, who are robbing a liquor store. Chris winds up breaking sobriety when Tony and him toast the marriage with the wine, and they reminisce about their bond, as well as the day that Chris gave up Adriana. And that was the first moment in this entire season to me where I was like, this is getting back to where I remember the show being. Like, this is great. The dynamic, the back and forth between Christopher and Tony. I was like, okay, we're back. Because I love that sequence. That's honestly one of my favorite scenes in the entire show. Is when Christopher and Tony are driving together and they steal the wine from the bikers and they, bust the bikers' balls later, and they're reminiscing about, their past and their bond with one another. That is quintessential Sopranos to me. Paulie refuses to donate the requested amount for the feast to the church because the church is strong arming him more than they ever did before, because there's this new guy who's at the church who isn't willing to accept Paulie's deals anymore and isn't intimidated by Paulie. Chris spends the first night of the festival on heroin because he winds up getting back on the drugs. And he's getting back on the drugs with the real estate agent. And this entire episode, in my opinion, features some of the best parts of this season and some of the best direction. Like, Alan Taylor's direction in this is tremendous. The shots of Chris high on heroin while he's laying there and he's looking up at the rides at night, and it is just some incredible direction and some fantastic cinematography. The next day, a ride winds up breaking down. Paulie gets blamed due to the cheapness. Janice fakes a neck injury so Bobby can extort more money from Paulie. Tony orders them to settle the dispute. Paulie learns that he may have prostate cancer. He's waiting for the results. And because of that, he winds up cursing at Nucci when she chastises him for his handling of the feast. Early at the Bada Bing, he sees a vision of the Virgin Mary, and that's when he reconciles with Nucci. So I mentioned that he reconciled with Nucci earlier. That's actually not what happened. He took a little longer to reconcile with her. My apologies. I watched season 6, part 1, like a week or two ago, so my recollection of it was a little fuzzy. But that's when he reconciles with Nucci, which was nice to see. But it seems like he was just scared into doing it more than anything else because of the Virgin Mary vision. And that is another great shot, by the way. So there's just some really great looking shots and some really good direction in this. And I like the stuff about the feast and seeing the feast, and I really liked the stuff with Tony and Christopher, and this was easily a pretty significant high point for me when it comes to season 6. Now, episode 10 is called Mo and Joe. It's directed by Steve Schill, written by Matthew Weiner. And this one, we're still focusing on Vito here. Vito is bored with just working a normal job, so he winds up stealing Jim's car and leaves, only to crash in another car. The owner refuses to take cash and goes to call the police, so Vito winds up killing him. Bobby's eye gets badly injured while making collections, and so that's when you get One-Eyed Bobby. And Tony admits to Melfi that he treats him and Janice unfairly because of resentments that he carries from their childhood. Melfi once again is pointing out that Janice may remind him of his mother. Knowing that a plea deal with the FBI would result in losing most of his assets, Johnny tries to ask Tony to get the owners of a company Johnny is a partner in to sell. Tony agrees as long as he sells his house to Janice at a discounted price. Johnny Sack then pleads guilty and admits in court that he is a part of the mafia, earning contempt from his peers. Janice begins to cry while thanking Tony for getting her the house, and Carmela, assuming she is upset, comforts her while Tony winds up, and Carmela, assuming he is upset. I didn't write this, by the way. Somebody else did. It's a typo. Comforts her while Tony winds up rolling his eyes, and that's the end of that episode. Episode 9 was right where I wanted the show to be, and episode 10 just kind of fell back again. A lot of more extra filler stuff here. I just have to be perfectly honest. A lot of extra filler stuff when it comes to the plot. But there were some good things. You get to see One-Eyed Bobby, which is a pretty memorable image. You have the whole stuff with Johnny Sack. But yeah, Mo and Joe is not really one of my favorite episodes of this season either. And it's another one that I can honestly put in the pretty forgettable pile of episodes of season 6. Episode 11 is called Cold Stones, and this one is directed by Tim Van Patten, written by Diane Frolov and Andrew Schneider and David Chase. This one has a heavier focus on AJ, which is not good. AJ gets fired from his job. I think this is also at the point when AJ hasn't met Blanca yet because he got fired from his job at Blockbuster. Tony admits to Melfi that he wants to hit AJ in therapy, but she winds up connecting it back to his mother again. That leads to him trying to really have a genuine sit down with AJ to get him to get a job, but AJ whines about it. So then Tony lashes out on the windshield of AJ's car. Vito winds up meeting with Tony, asks him to return to the family, but Tony's men aren't having it. Phil, in particular, because he's related to Vito by marriage, demands him to be killed because of his fragile male ego. Vito returns to his family and calls Jim, who rejects him. Phil and his men then ambush Vito, kill him, and then sodomize him with pool cues. One of the made men who killed Vito, Dom, comes to Satriali's while Silvio and Carlo are there and begins joking about Carlo also being gay, and then they wind up killing him. Carmela goes to Paris with Rosalie, is enamored with architecture. She dreams about Adriana walking her deceased dog near the Eiffel Tower, and a policeman then says someone needs to tell her that she's dead. That's when Carmela is getting an idea that Adriana is dead. This was better. This was a better episode than Mom and Joe. This one had Vito getting killed, which is honestly one of the most brutal kills in the entire show. And just the image of Phil walking out of that closet is one of the most chilling images in the show, too. And the whole stuff with Carmela going to Paris, so you get some really wonderful visuals there, some good direction by Tim Van Patten. Yeah, the stuff with AJ is annoying, but it's not as prominent of a subplot as Carmela and Ro going to Paris, or the stuff with Vito trying to get back to his previous life and then wind up getting killed. So Cold Stones, I would say, is another good episode in this first half of season 6. Then you get to the finale of the first part of season 6, named Kaisha. It's directed by Alan Taylor, written by Terrence Winter, David Chase, and Matthew Weiner. And this one has Tony having Benny blow up Phil's wire room to get back at Phil. The war is really starting to start here between New York and New Jersey. Little Carmine hosts a sit down to try to negotiate peace, but Phil storms out when he brings up Billy. Suspecting Tony's role in the disappearance of Gamiello, Phil begins plotting a revenge hit, only to wind up having a heart attack. Tony visits Phil in the hospital, telling him about what he learned in his coma, encouraging him to focus on family, which at the time moves Phil. Tony tries to seduce the realtor, unaware that she's seeing Christopher. Having met in his recovery group, Chris begins using heroin with her. Tony spots the two talking. Chris is forced to admit the truth, so he does not find out about the drugs. Tony acts indifferent, but he expresses jealousy to Melfi, who, actually commends him for showing restraint. While at work, AJ meets and starts dating Blanca. A group of youths that regularly bother her hang outside her house, and AJ bribes them to leave her alone. Because this is the point when AJ he gets a real job, works in construction, a job that Tony set up for him. After Adriana's mother tries to off herself, Carmela thinks about hiring a PI to find Adriana. Tony has Silvio get the stop order lifted on her spec house, though, so that she winds up dropping the idea. And the Sopranos relatives wind up coming to their house for Christmas, and AJ brings Blanca and her son, and the families sit together, and Carmela holds Tony's hand, and it ends almost like a storybook ending for the last episode of this first part of season 6. Didn't mind this one. You're establishing the war between the two different mobs more here. You have this stuff with AJ and Blanca. You have uh the whole sort of thing going on with Phil and Tony having this heart to heart in the hospital. You have the drama of Carmela thinking about hiring a PI to try to find out where Adriana is. So there's some good building blocks here for the rest of the season, and I think it's a good conclusion to the first part of season 6. Now we get to the last 9 episodes of the entire series, part 2 of season 6. Now the first episode of this second part of the season is called Soprano Home Movies, and it's directed by Tim Van Patten, written by Diane Frolov, Andrew Schneider, David Chase, and Matthew Weiner. And this is one of the handful of episodes from season 6 that I do like. I like this episode. It's pretty heavy when it comes to its subject matter at points, but I like it. I think it shows the dysfunction in the Soprano family really well. I think it's got some good imagery, and I think overall it's definitely one of the best episodes of this season. It takes place about 8 months after the events of the first part of season 6. Phil winds up leaving the hospital, and he decides to take Tony's advice and enjoy life with his family. The gun that Tony dropped at the end of the finale of season 5 is found by some kid. The kid is then found by the police, so now Tony is looking at a potential gun charge. Tony and Carmela decide to travel to Bobby and Janice's New York cabin to celebrate his birthday, where Bobby gives Tony a customized assault rifle. Tony mentions the possibility of promoting Bobby, even though Bobby's never killed anyone before because his father wanted to keep him out of the mob. The four play some drunken Monopoly, which is an entertaining, enjoyable scene, despite its massive dysfunction on display. Janice tells a story about Livia that Tony didn't want other people to hear. Tony begins insulting her about it and just insulting her in general. Bobby then winds up getting upset and then fights Tony and actually kicks his ass. The next day, Tony orders Bobby to go to Montreal to complete a hit job over a custody dispute because he's petty like that. Oh, now you got to go kill somebody. After Bobby completes the hit, Tony returns home, is told that the FBI added the gun to their RICO case against him. He watches Janice's gift, a compilation of old videos of him playing with his sisters, And then Bobby returns to the cabin and holds his daughter as he looks out at the lake. I think this is also the one where Bobby and Tony are in the boat and shooting the shit and talking to each other, and that's when you have the line that people use all the time as evidence and proof that Tony dies at the end of this show, where Bobby says, "You won't hear it when it happens." But Bobby certainly heard it when it happened. I'm just gonna leave it there because I'm gonna be talking about that in depth in a singular video in the future, all about the ending of The Sopranos, and all about the theory that Tony is dead and the discourse around it. Now, this episode, though, really strong start to this second part of the season. The next episode is episode 14. It's called Stage 5. This one is directed by Alan Taylor and written by Terrence Winter. This is where you get the premiere of Cleaver, and everyone but Tony is seeing the parallels between Tony and Chris's and Adriana's relationship, and they're wondering why Tony has his head in the sand. So we get the Daniel Baldwin cameo. Carmela points this out to Tony, and then he confronts Chris about it. Chris then forces Dolan to pretend as though he stole the plot from another film. Tony, though, is not convinced. So then he admits his suspicion to Jennifer Melfi that Christopher hates him, and that Cleaver was his way of showing this. Johnny Sack is now dying of lung cancer in prison, and the Lupertazzi capo Faustino Santoro has Phil's successor killed at a dinner with Silvio. Little Carmine declines to get involved when Tony presses him, not wanting to risk his own life. Johnny takes up smoking again, learns from the orderly that he may have longer to live than anticipated. And the orderly is played by a pretty well-known director. I think it's Sidney Pollack. It's actually a pretty good performance by him. Only to die soon after. Phil celebrates Billy's birthday, but he tells a capo that he was weak when he did not act after Billy's death. Promises that they will not make that mistake again. So now Phil is about ready to turn at this point, to go away from his plan to just be a family man. At the baptism of Chris's daughter, he and Tony embrace, but it doesn't really feel like it's a genuine embrace. There's some good drama in this. The Cleaver stuff is fun. I like that. I like the culmination to it. It legitimately looks like it could be a fun slasher movie, in all honesty. I would like to see somebody actually make Cleaver. And I like the scenes with Johnny Sack. There's some really good bits with that, and some good acting by the Johnny Sack actor. Now, episode 15, which is episode 3 of season 6, part 2, is called Remember When. This one is directed by Phil Abraham and written by Terrence Winter. And this is another one that I enjoyed. So this one deals with Tony going on the lam with Paulie to Miami. They lay low because the FBI discovers the body of Tony's first murder. And so now he's under investigation for a potential murder charge. So he and Paulie go to Miami. He takes out a bridge loan from Hesh to cover a series of lost bets. He learns that Jackie is being blamed for the murder. So that completely means that he's scot-free. Like, he's not going to get this murder charge. To celebrate, he takes Paulie out on a fishing boat where he asks him if he told Johnny about Ralphie's joke, which is connected to an earlier incident in the series. Increasingly annoyed with Paulie over the course of the trip, he considers killing him. Paulie has a nightmare about returning home about Pussy, where he asks if he will stand up when my time comes. He sends the Sopranos an expensive espresso machine the next day, and after Centauro takes food off of Phil's plate at a dinner, Phil has him killed, making him the official boss of Lupertazzi family. And this is really where the wheels are set in motion for the war between New Jersey and New York. Junior gambles with other patients in his facility, but he's shut down by another patient. Junior attacks him, getting him put on a new set of medications. I like this bit where Junior is trying to be the mob boss of this facility. That was fun. And this is where Junior still had that cantankerous energy that I like about the character, and he wasn't just a shell of himself as he would be later on in the series. He had his moments where he was forgetful, but you could still see the old Junior still. An ill-tempered young patient who has become friends with him tells him not to take his pills, but then he's threatened with a transfer if he does not comply. So then he winds up taking the pills, disappointing Junior's friend, who he calls Anthony, while trying to make up with him. This friend then snaps on Junior and breaks his arm. And then Junior receives animal-assisted therapy, sitting apart from the other patients. And the therapy, I think he's there with a cat. I believe he has a cat. Could be a dog, but I think it's a cat, which is kind of a running theme in this second half of season 6. Now, this is another one. Yeah, like I said, I liked this one. I liked Paulie and Tony bonding, hanging out together, going to Miami. I like this stuff where they're on the boat and you have this tension of will he kill Paulie or will he not? And I like the stuff with Junior in the facility trying to be the mob boss. Now, episode 16 is called Chasing It, and this one is directed by Tim Van Patten and written by Matthew Weiner. And I don't care for this episode. This is one of the most filler episodes of the entire show, if you ask me. Not just season 6. This is just an episode that's like, Tony's a gambler, and he's an addict. That's basically all this episode is. That's really the bulk of it. It's another instance of David Chase inserting himself and going way overboard to make Tony as unlikable as possible. That's really what it is. So Tony, he loses and keeps on losing. He's making bets and he's on a losing streak. That's what most of this is. He's chasing it. He's losing bet after bet after bet. He offers to pay Hesh Vig despite him not charging interest for the loan. When Hesh visits Tony and his crew, Tony makes several jokes at Hesh's expense. Carmela sells the spec house. Tony demands a cut of the profit so he can bet it, but she refuses. His bet winds up paying off, though, which gets him pissed off about the money he could have made, and they argue. And I think Chase and Wiener were trying to make this into something where this is another reason why Tony's a jerk. But the way that it's written, you're kind of like, he did pull the strings to get her that spec house. He really was instrumental in terms of providing her with that opportunity. Why shouldn't he get a cut? Why shouldn't he get a cut of that profit? I don't think he was asking for the full cut. He was just asking for a certain amount so that he could put it into the pot. So if it paid off, they would both make out like bandits. I know it sounds like I might be justifying gambling there, but I'm just saying that the way that it's set up and the way that it's presented, it makes Tony look like he has a point. It doesn't make him look like a dick. It doesn't make him look like an asshole, despite him blowing up at Carmela, because it seems like a justifiable bit of anger on his part. He even points out that I pulled the strings, I got the contractor to do all of this. I got, I did so much to get you this spec house. You did a lot of work. You did a great job, but I feel like I should get a cut too. And he's not wrong at all. They wind up making up later, of course, though, after the argument. Carmela admits that she's afraid of different threats that pop up in their lives. Tony insists that he's way up after surviving being shot. Vito's son is acting out in school, and his mother requests money from Tony so they can relocate. Uh, and Tony winds up going to Phil for the money, but Phil is being a hard ass as usual and refuses. But he does decide to go see the kid. And the kid is acting out, dressing like a goth. And this is pretty cringe. The stuff with this kid. And then it continues because then later on he acts out at school and takes a shit in the shower. I'm like, not only is that a disgusting image, it's another instance of just forced writing, questionable writing. This was not necessary, not needed. It doesn't add anything to the series. And honestly, even with all this the confrontations, the verbal confrontations that Phil or Tony have with this kid, it doesn't amount to anything. The kid never it doesn't even seem like the kid's arc is even mentioned again in terms of him changing his ways, deciding to do something different, deciding to be the man of the house. Nothing. So it was pointless. I had to see a kid take a shit for nothing? Why did I need to see that? Why did I need to see this kid look like a Puerto Rican whore for no reason and take a shit? Come on. Really? Tony decides to pay for the mom to relocate, but he gambles away the money. Instead, he pays for the kid to be sent to boot camp. And I guess that's the way that it ends. Like he's going to get sent to boot camp, and that's what's going to provide him with the discipline. But you never really see the outcome of that. So pointless. Absolutely fucking pointless. AJ proposes to Blanca. She initially accepts, but then she breaks up with him. Hesh's girlfriend passes away. Tony pays back his loan and then offers some condolences. And then that's it. It was like 40 something minutes too. It was an incredibly short episode. And there's barely anything to it. The most memorable thing about it is a kid taking a shit in the shower. Episode 17 is called Walk Like a Man. It's directed by Terrence Winter and written by Terrence Winter. And this is where AJ is at his most insufferable. He's depressed and he's lonely and he's sad because Blanca broke up with him and his parents then sent him to a therapist. Tony has him spend time with Carlos's son. AJ helps him abduct and then torture some kid, which is messed up. Tony tells Melfi that he intended to quit therapy, but he feels that he has to stay now, that AJ is suffering due to his rotten genes. Chris notices that Tony is talking to him less, and he points out that Chris never comes to the Bada Bing or Saturales anymore, despite his insistence that the alcohol there makes him anxious. Paulie's cousin steals from Chris's father-in-law's store. Paulie refuses him a cut of the profits, so Chris throws his cousin out a window. Paulie tears up Chris's lawn with his car, and Tony helps him make peace, during which Chris decides to drink with the crew. Paulie makes several crude jokes about Chris's daughter, leaves when he notices Tony laughing. With his sponsor out of town, he goes to Dolan's house, tries to give him the mob stories to write about, until he says you're in the mafia, which is Dolan. And then Chris kills him. Returns home where he straightens up a tree in his yard that Paulie knocked over, and that's Walk Like a Man. This one is very focused on Christopher. Thankfully, it's not as primarily focused on AJ and his mopiness. But there still are some questionable force stuff in this. The way that everybody in the Bada Bang is just busting Chris's balls just felt so forced. And just another instance of David Chase just being like, hey, you shouldn't like any of these guys. These guys are pricks. These guys are assholes. Just overcompensating. Just trying way too hard to present the audience with something they already knew. We already know that these guys are pricks. You don't have to make them into even bigger pricks to make a point that everybody already knows. It just makes it come across like you're trying too hard and you're forcing things. Same thing with Chris shooting Dolan. Another forced thing that seemed Chris has been impulsive before. He's beat up on Adriana, but he never really felt like the kind of guy who would just grab a gun and just shoot somebody he considered to be a friend in the head. That just felt, whether he was high or not, it just felt very forced and out of character. And just another attempt to try to make these characters into stereotypical one-dimensional mob guys. That's what's just so crazy to me, is that one of the biggest appeals of this show is that these mob guys, they're not just caricatures, they're not just stereotypes. There are some good things about them. There are some likable things about them. And to open up a discourse within people in terms of, why are you liking these guys despite what they do? And instead, throughout the course of this season, Chase just makes all of these characters, for the most part, with a few exceptions, look as vindictive, evil, and scummy as possible until he provides them with their ultimate downfall. And I just feel like it was just incredibly forced. I really do. It's like Chase was sick of it. He was sick of the accolades. He was sick of the fan base. He was sick of the pressure, and he just wanted to be done with it. So he just decided to uh, kill his own show, basically. Kill the likable nature of some of these characters. Show that Chris is just a fuck up and he's an addict and he will always be an addict. And now he's also willing to shoot Dolan in the head. And he was pushed to drinking again because of Paulie and how shitty he is. And then the whole stuff where he's talking about his kid and he's drunk and visibly drunk and the people are giving him shit for it. It just felt like it was very, very unnatural in terms of the tone and the progression of the show to me. That being said, I still didn't mind this episode. I didn't love it, but I didn't mind it. I would say that it's better, a lot better than chasing it. Episode 18 is called Kennedy and Heidi. It's directed by Alan Taylor, written by Matthew Weiner and David Chase. And this one deals with Phil learning about the waste that Tony's sending to sanitation containing asbestos. So he demands more profit. This, of course, understandably upsets Tony. Chris winds up driving erratically with Tony while not wearing a seatbelt and crashes, severely injuring himself while listening to the Departed soundtrack, specifically the song "Comfortably Numb," which is the way that song is utilized in this episode is fantastic. It's amazing. Chris tells Tony to call a taxi instead of a ambulance because he will not pass a drug test. Realizing that Chris is using heroin again, Tony winds up suffocating him. And this is a pretty emotionally resonant, strong moment in the show. I interpreted it as Chris was already gone. I mean, he was coughing up blood prior to Tony holding his nose and suffocating him. So what I interpreted the scene as is a little different than some people have, where Tony just killed him in cold blood because of the fact that he was an addict again, and he was so disappointed in him. I interpreted it as Tony putting him out of his misery because he was pinned up against the steering wheel. It would be a while until the ambulance would get there. He was crushed. Could have possibly had a severe enough injury that he might have been paralyzed, like a back injury. And so he's coughing up blood. He's not doing good at all. And so Tony was like, I'm just going to put you out of your misery, man. That's how I interpreted it. And yes, Tony does technically kill him. But I think his injuries would have ultimately killed him, or at least crippled him, either way. Now, Tony talks to Melfi later and talks about how relieved he is that Christopher is dead. And Christopher's role in the deaths of, well, actually, no, not Christopher's role in the deaths of Blundetto and Pussy, but Tony's role in them. So he talks about his relief in Chris dying and the relief of Blundetto dying and Pussy dying. And in the session, he says he's not grieving and that he hates faking the act of grieving when things like this happen, which then leads to him being annoyed by the display of sorrow at Chris's wake. He then attends Nucci's wake with Carmela. AJ seems like he's improving, moving away from his depression, but falls back into depression after his friends beat up a young African American. He asks his therapist, why can't we all just get along? And then Tony leaves for Vegas after seeing Chris's widow breastfeed their daughter. And then he has sex with this random woman, played by Sarah Shiani, and takes peyote with her. And it's Chris's former stripper, Kamare. So it's actually somebody that Chris knew. And he has a winning streak in roulette. He mumbles he's dead and then collapses in a fit of laughter. Tony watches the sun rise over the Red Rock Canyon with the stripper. He sees a flash of light in the sky and he cries, I get it. This is, despite some things that I think were honestly not handled as well as I would have liked, this is still one of the better episodes of season 6, for sure. When it comes to Christopher's death, I'm okay with the way that it plays out. But when it comes to the way that Tony deals with it in therapy, I'm not. It comes across as totally out of character. I do not buy that the same Tony Soprano, who in the same season was having that heart to heart with Chris, and they were reminiscing about all their times that they spent together and their friendship, that he would just all of a sudden be like, oh, I'm relieved that he's dead. It comes across like bullshit. It comes across as if David Chase, yet again, is just trying way too hard to make Tony into the most terrible person imaginable, to make Tony into a textbook sociopath. That's really what it is. And not only is that an issue for me, it's also the fact that this is where Melfi should have broke things off with Tony. Not in episode 21. Here. This is when she should have broke things off with him. Because she sees that he's not showing any remorse. He's not showing any grief. He's showing relief for Christopher's death. This is where she realizes this guy is too far gone. I can't do anything to help him anymore. And then she cuts him off. That's how it should have been. She cuts him off in a professional manner, though, instead of the way that she did later on in the show, which also felt incredibly out of character. Because of those things, that's why this episode is not as good as I think it could have been. But it's still an episode that I would say that I ultimately didn't mind. Now, episode 19 is called The Second Coming. It's directed by Tim Van Patten and written by Terrence Winter. And this is just more insufferable AJ. He's reading the poem The Second Coming, and it's pretentious as hell. This is where he tries to kill himself by drowning himself in the pool, and Tony saves him. And that's where you get a good moment where he comforts AJ after seeing how genuinely depressed he is. Carmelo and Tony then feel guilty about what happened with AJ and then try to comfort each other initially, but then they wind up blaming each other because that's just typical Carmelo and Tony. In a therapy session with his parents, AJ recounts upsetting memories of them going back to his childhood, mentions Livia's depressing words about it's all big nothing having an effect on him, Tony rejects Melfi's idea that AJ's attempt could have been a cry for help and mentions that in Vegas, he realized that there's something else beyond the human experience, but he doesn't want to look into it further. Elliot tells Melfi that a recent study shows sociopaths use therapy as a way to sharpen their skills. Phil rejects Tony's compromise about the asbestos. Lupertazzi Capo harasses Meadow, who recently committed to law school and started to date Patsy's son. Tony understandably freaks out, gets pissed, winds up curb stomping the guy. And then little Carmine tries to broker peace, but Phil refuses to see Tony, and it's just done. And now this is where Phil is gonna start putting a target on Tony's back officially. Now, I said that Melfi left him in the last episode. That's not actually true. What happens is she winds up I think Melfi winds up leaving him in the next episode, the Blue Comet. So she leaves him in episode 20. Regardless, it should have happened in episode 18. That should have been the moment. It shouldn't have been a dinner party with her therapist and the colleagues essentially shaming her and talking about this study that apparently was like 30 years old. So the way that it's written makes Melfi look like a dumbass. It makes her look stupid, which I don't like when it comes to the way that Melfi was written for the majority of the show. To just have her come across as a completely dumb doctor who isn't aware of a study about sociopaths and therapy that's like 30 years old. And that study coupled with peer pressure is what leads to her dropping him. Why is it that? It should just be she sees that she can't help him anymore because she's done everything that she can. He's not having panic attacks anymore and he's not on meds. So, and she sees that he shows no remorse for Christopher's death and talks about how relieved he is. So, all right, we're done. That's all that needed to happen. It makes her look strong and not look dumb and not look like she's just being led by her colleagues. Still not too bad of an episode because I will admit, like these last few episodes, as the series is concluding, are definitely some of the stronger episodes of season 6. They're pretty consistent when it comes to their quality. Some are a little better than others, but for the most part, they're at least good. And they have some great things in them. Now, episode 20, The Blue Comet, is directed by Alan Taylor, written by David Chase and Matthew Weiner. And this is really where the bloodbath starts. Silvio, he kills Carlos's cousin for trying to work with the Lupertazis. Phil orders Tony, Silvio, and Bobby killed. The FBI warns Tony, and he then orders a hit on Phil. AJ starts to notice his friend's ex-girlfriend, and the two begin seeing each other after they're discharged. Janice tells Tony that Junior's savings can no longer pay for his facility and asks him for help, but he refuses. Melfi at a dinner with her colleagues. So I mentioned the study, and the study was brought up by her therapist in the previous episode. And I mentioned the dinner, but the dinner happened in this episode. So forgive me for getting that mixed up. Like I said, things are a bit fuzzy when it comes to this last season because I watched both parts. I would say I finished it like a week or so ago. But this is the episode where the dinner party happens and where Melfi reads the article and then the study about sociopaths using therapy as a way to sharpen their skills. And this was a study that Chase himself read and was like, I have to put that into the show. And it's painfully obvious that it's forced in there. So is his whole mindset of Tony Soprano being a sociopath. And the dinner party happens. She gets embarrassed. She then winds up reading the study. She then has a session with Tony. And breaks things off with Tony in a very awkward and unfitting fashion. She just starts being bitchy to him. Like out of nowhere, just starts being mean, just starts insulting him, just starts giving him shit, setting him off. He then storms off and it's over. And I was like, that feels so out of character for Melfi as a person. And I hate, I absolutely despise the interpretation that I get from David Chase when it comes to the therapy sessions as a result of this part of the Blue Comet. Because the interpretation is that therapy is pointless. Therapy is meaningless. Like Tony Soprano said in one episode, it's a big jerk off. And that all these therapy sessions that we've seen throughout this entire show don't mean anything. They don't have any real emotional weight because you cannot tell whether or not Tony was embellishing things or faking it. And as a result, the therapy sessions do not have the same impact. A key core aspect of this entire show is now undermined considerably because of this twist that Chase decided to throw in there because he wanted to paint Tony as a sociopath. Because Chase had contempt for the audience at this point. It's very obvious that's the case because the audience is an extension of Melfi. And so when there are outside sources telling her, hey, he's a sociopath. What are you doing? Why are you caring about him so much? Why are you continuing to see him? You're just helping him. You're just enabling him. It's David Chase essentially telling the audience of his show the same thing. And I don't like that. Quite frankly, it pisses me the fuck off. It really does. It's aggravating, to say the least. Especially when it comes to this narrative that has been throughout this entire show about Tony going to therapy. That was the main thing that made The Sopranos different from other mob shows and other mob stories at the time, because it was a mobster going to therapy and bearing his soul and being human. Instead, because of this revelation, all of that is most likely bullshit. That Tony was lying, he was fabricating things, he wasn't actually showing real emotions about his family, about his kids, about his mom, about other people in his crew, about what he does. None of that, because it's all an act. So, because of that, the message is therapy is meaningless. And those scenes are meaningless. And that's fucking bullshit. And I'm not gonna bow to the altar on the throne of David Chase and suck his dick like so many other fans of this show are. I'm not doing it. That was fucking stupid. And it's questionable in a numerous amount of ways. And it makes me think that David Chase just doesn't like therapy at all. And he wanted to make this show an indictment against therapy. And it tracks because he's quoted saying that he had really bad experiences with therapists. And that was one of his motivations in terms of having therapy in this show. So I think by the end of this show, because he's developed such a strong contempt for the audience, he's sick of the show, he's sick of it all, he decided to make that abundantly clear when it comes to his viewpoint on therapy. And as somebody who has benefited greatly from therapy throughout their life, as somebody who without my child therapist would not be here today doing these videos, would not be graduating from college, would not be holding a job, would not be doing any of these things, the message that therapy is meaningless and is a big jerk off, that's fucked up and wrong. And I understand that there are some therapists that suck. That's the same for any profession. But to have this argument that it's all a big sham, it's all a big jerk off, I don't align with at all. And I know some people will disagree. They say, "Oh, well, that's not really what he's trying to say." I really don't think that's the case. It is what he's trying to say. He already has a disdain for therapy. And it's no more evident than how he handles Jennifer Melfi's arc and how he concludes it. He makes her look like a total unprofessional jerk off with the way that she broke things off with Tony. It makes her look weak. It makes her look like she's just somebody who succumbs to peer pressure and just doesn't want to hear it anymore from her colleagues instead of having her own free will. And even Lorraine Bracco herself did not like how her character's arc ended. She had a problem with it. But because David Chase at this time had such an ego that was even wider than Tony Soprano's waistline, he wasn't going to hear anybody saying, hey, maybe let's go in a different direction, including Lorraine Bracco, the actress who played this character for many, many years and understood and knew this character from the inside out as a result. The way that David Chase just completely destroys therapy and presents it as a big jerk off, and the way that he ended the arc between Tony and Melfi is way more upsetting to me than the ending of the show when everything faded to black. I have issues with that too, but not as many issues as this, because this is a core aspect of the show, and it's just completely, totally undermined by this stupid twist that was only there because David Chase wanted to make Tony a sociopath. So there are some other things in this episode, but I had to vent a little bit before I got to those. So you have more stuff involving Carmela and Tony. Uh, the hitman, they go to the house of Phyllis Kamari, mistaking her father for him, and then they kill them both. Tony learns of the failed hit, orders everyone to go underground. Bobby gets killed. Silvio is shot, and he gets put into a coma. Tony orders Carmela to go into hiding and tries to get AJ to do the same, but he starts crying over Bobby, so Tony drags him out of bed and throws him onto the floor. Tony then goes to a safe house, lies in bed, clutching the rifle that Bobby gave him, and that's the end of the Blue Comet. I like the stuff involving Tony going underground. I don't even mind Bobby getting whacked. It's a sad scene because Bobby, he seemed like kind of a good guy, even though he did some bad things. He did seem like, out of a lot of the members of the crew, he seemed like the guy who had the most heart, seemed like a pretty decent person. And then for him to go down like that was pretty sad. And I don't mind some of the stuff involving what's going on with the rest of the crew, or Phil and his crew and everything. And there's some good tension in this episode. There's some good things. In fact, most of this episode is actually really good, except for the whole stuff with Melfi and Tony, which sucks. Now, the final episode of the entire series is called Made in America. It's episode 21 of season 6. It's written and directed by David Chase. A lot of people love this episode. They think it's a masterpiece. I disagree. I really do. I think there are some good things about this episode, like there is for a lot of other episodes in this season. But I also think there's some things where I think Chase honestly does a bad job. The whole stuff with finding Phil, finding out where he is, not bad. Tony working with the FBI guy to get some information. Butchie and the rest of Phil's guys coming to an agreement about, not trying to take out Tony, setting up a truce, exchange for sanctioning Phil's death, paying Janice for Bobby's hit. Don't mind that. When we get to Bobby's hit, though, I mean, when we get to Phil's hit, though, that's where I have the problem because the way that it's presented is way too comical. It's way too unintentionally hilarious in terms of its tone. I blame Chase for that. Him getting popped in front of his wife and his kids at this gas station, shot in the head. That's enough. You don't need to have him on the ground, his wife freaking out, the car rolling backwards, rolling over his head, and then people who are watching this all unfold at the gas station, hooting and hollering, and one guy throwing up later. That is the wrong tone for that sequence. And I blame David Chase for that. He's the showrunner. It's his idea. It's his way of the highway, right? Anyone who doesn't want to do what he wants to do is going to get whacked off the show. So he's to blame for that. Wrong tone, especially after all the buildup for Phil and him being this intimidating presence and him being such a big thorn in Tony's side. And then for it to have this comical death scene, totally missed the mark to me. Another thing that misses the mark was AJ and the whole stuff with the army and everything even before that with him and his other girlfriend and them reading the news and him uh, whining and moaning and complaining about how not enough people care about the Iraq war. It was another instance of David Chase just forcing his politics into the show. He's quoted for saying, "I don't know why people care about my show more than the Iraq war." So he was already irritated and annoyed with that while he was doing this season. So he throws that in here with AJ and with him essentially talking down to the audience and said, "Hey, why don't you give a shit more about this?" And I'm like, they're two separate things, David. You can care about the Iraq war and politics, but you can also really care and really enjoy and really get into a TV show. Really self-centered, just pretentious ass way to view that kind of situation. I respect and I appreciate David for his contributions to this show, which are valid and very valuable. But at the same time, I think the guy is more than a little overrated. He says he was responsible for every dialogue, every line, every success, everything about this show that worked. And other people are saying similar things, but there's other writers who were forced off the show who seem like they're saying differently. So I don't know what the full truth is, but I call bullshit on him being responsible for everything, for all of the success of this show. It's a collaborative effort. And considering Chase's track record prior to The Sopranos and after, I don't buy that he's a brilliant genius auteur, writer, showrunner. I don't. The guy who wrote like 30 episodes of The Rockford Files, a few episodes of Kolchak the Night Stalker, and was the writer of a crappy vampire movie called Grave of the Vampire. And then he co-wrote Many Saints of Newark, which was a piece of shit. And some indie drama called Not Fade Away that nobody fucking remembers for the most part. No, I call bullshit. I legitimately do. I think this is one of those instances. He's left to his own devices here. He's the sole writer and the sole director on this episode. And and he didn't have the same people to push back anymore who are like, "Hey, don't insert your politics in such a forced, obvious way. Why are you trying to make Tony into a stereotypical sociopath and making him a one-dimensional character and a boring character as a result? A guy who just cares about money and power and saving his own hide instead of the complex, nuanced character with flaws, but also some good qualities that he was for most of the show." And I think the way that stuff with AJ and the army and AJ and his opinion on the Iraq war and the whole way that Phil gets taken out, and the whole stuff with Melfi and Tony in the previous episode, and even the end of this episode is all just an extension of David Chase's inflated ego and his fully developed contempt for his audience. And I'm not going to give him a pass for it. I'm not. Phil gets whacked in a laughable fashion. AJ's talking about going to join the army, but his parents give him a job working for Carmine's production company instead. Meadow gets engaged to her boyfriend. She's dedicated to becoming a white collar lawyer, making Tony disappointed that she's now working adjacent to his criminal life and not a doctor. Carlo disappears after his son is arrested. Tony's lawyer suspects that he may become an informant. Tony offers Carlos his position to Paulie, who reluctantly accepts after Tony basically pushes him because he says he's going to give it to Patsy. Janice visits Junior, now in a state facility, tries to tell him of Bobby's death. Tony learns that Janice is trying to get Junior's money. He speaks to him for the first time since the shooting, tries to convince him to give it to Bobby's children, but Junior does not recognize him. Tony reminds him of how he ran North Jersey, and then he leaves in tears when Junior murmurs, "Well, that's nice." That was a great scene. I think the writing by Chase there was on point. It was a very somber and genuinely tragic sequence to see Junior in that state and to see him just not remember anything. Tony then meets his family at Holstein's at the diner. He tells Carmelo that Carlo will be testifying against him. AJ reminds him to remember the good times. A man who was just hanging around in a members only jacket goes to the restroom next to their table. And as Meadow enters the diner after trying to park 3 times, Tony looks up and then the shot cuts to black. And that's the end of The Sopranos. Now, I'm going to keep it brief here because I'm going to save my full thoughts on this ending for a separate video. When I first heard about this ending and when I first saw it, I thought it was bullshit and I thought it was pretentious and it sucked. And I wasn't the only one. Like, a lot of people, when this show initially aired its final episode, people thought their cable went out. And I think it definitely was a bit of a gimmick, to be honest. People were talking about how it's brilliant and artistic and it was ahead of its time and so on and so forth. And people are entitled to feel that way. But I definitely feel there still was a little bit of a gimmick here where to get people talking. We're thinking about that their cable went out or their TV got unplugged or something. But I think that's a problem still because now you're not necessarily talking about the weight or the emotion of the ending. You're just talking about, did my cable go out? I don't think that's necessarily the right way to leave the audience off with this show after spending so much time with these characters and so many hours with this series. But I've warmed up to it. I have to be honest. I've warmed up to it. I don't think it's brilliant. I don't love it. I don't think it's an amazing, incredible ending like other people do. I've warmed up to it to the point where I think it's all right. I can deal with it. Because I am one of those few people who actually feels that it was up to interpretation. That it was open-ended and that you could interpret it as Tony getting whacked or you can interpret it as otherwise, that he continued to live on, but either way, Tony was going to get his. Either way, he was not going to get a happy ending. That was very clear. He was either going to wind up in the can or he was going to wind up dead. There was not going to be an alternative where he was going to, get away with it all and live out the rest of his years with his family and retire from the business. It was never going to happen. So to me, having it set up as this open-ended ending, but still having pieces in place to interpret it different ways, I think it still ultimately works as a finale and a conclusion to this series. I think it should be perfectly acceptable that anyone can think that it's up to interpretation. And the reason for that is David Chase feels the same way. people will try to cherry pick quotes where he says that he was gonna kill Tony, or has something slip where he says the death scene. They can do that all they want to, but there's countless other quotes from David Chase that are saying that it was up to interpretation. And I think that is ultimately what the ending was. It was a little bit of a gimmick with the fade to black thing, but I think it was up to interpretation because of the fact that HBO still wasn't necessarily thinking that it was over. So they wanted to leave things open for maybe a movie or for maybe another spinoff. And also, I think Chase just wanted people to think, wanted people to have an ending where they could talk about it and have theories and discussions, and that is the case. People still do that to this day. I think it's wrong for people to just basically be like, "No, you're wrong. There's only one way to interpret it." Like, why do that to this show? Why make it so people can't have discussions or have opinions, and have them be valid when it comes to the other side, when it comes to the other interpretation? Why do that with this show? It's limiting, and I think it's completely unnecessary. So yeah, I think the ending is not what I would consider to be the way that I would have personally liked this to have ended. I would have preferred a more conclusive, a more clear ending, but it's something that I can still ultimately accept and deal with. And I'm more upset about what happened with Melfi and Tony and how that was just completely undermined more than anything else when it comes to this season and this entire show, in all honesty. And definitely, I will admit, it was a good choice of song at the end too. "Don't Stop Believin'" by Journey. I think that was a good uh, representation of Tony and his family's mindset at that moment, and the audience too. "Don't Stop Believin'." Maybe they could make it out alive. Maybe we could see more. Maybe this isn't the end, but it ultimately was. But anyway, that is my thoughts on season 6 of The Sopranos. In my opinion, an interesting and intriguing, but heavily flawed season. And a little bit of a disappointing end to what I felt was ultimately a pretty good show. I don't think it's the greatest show ever made myself, but I would say seasons 1 through 4 are some really great television. Season 5 through 6, things are starting to kind of go off the rails, but there's still some good stuff in there. And as a result, I would say it's still a good show. And it's still a show that I would recommend to anybody who, for whatever reason, hasn't seen it all the way through. But yeah, that's my thoughts on The Sopranos and its final season. And until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.